This is an NBC News special report. Here's Lester Holt.
Good afternoon. We're coming on the air as President Biden prepares to mark a solemn moment for the nation. 1 year since the school shooting in Uvalde, Texas, devastated a community and horrified the country. 19 children and 2 teachers were killed on this day by an 18-year-old armed with an assault rifle. It was the 3rd deadliest school shooting in U.S. history. Earlier today, communities in Texas paused to remember the lives lost with a moment of silence. And the bells tolled at St. Philip's Church in Uvalde. The shooting not only left great sadness in its wake, but also great anger, specifically at law enforcement and their delayed response. It also reignited the debate over gun control. President Biden and Democrats did push through some limited restrictions last year. Today, he is expected to push for more. We expect to see the president here momentarily, but right now, let me bring in NBC News Chief White House Correspondent Peter Alexander. Peter, what can you tell us?
Lester, we expect to hear some powerful words from the president just moments from now. According to White House officials, the president is expected to say that too many schools, too many everyday places in this country have now turned into killing fields. It was 1 year ago that this awful event occurred in Uvalde, Texas. You see him there alongside the First Lady. She traveled with him at the time to Uvalde for a memorial and a mass, as well as they stand there before some candles honoring the victims of that loss. And then only a matter of days and weeks later, before the U.S. passed the most significant gun legislation in 30 years, the Safer Communities Act. And it's expected that the president, Lester, during his remarks today, will call on Americans again at this time to act. You noted the awful circumstances, 19 children, 2 teachers dead at the time. The president expected to remember those individuals. But it's not just this shooting that's on his mind, also the Buffalo shooting that was 1 year ago, plus 10 days, only 10 days separated that shooting at a Buffalo supermarket that killed so many and the shooting that took place at the Uvalde school. Lester?
And here is the president.
Before I begin, well, I'm beginning, but I realize this is a really tough day for all the families. Remembering is important, but it's also painful. 1 year ago today, Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, turned into another killing field in America. A few days later, Jill and I traveled there and stood before those 21 crosses outside the school. On each cross, a name, like in these candles behind us, 19 children, 9, 10, 11 years old, and 2 devoted educators, and 17 more injured. We spent hours with the grieving families who were broken and never, ever will quite be the same. To the families of the children and the educators who we know that 1 year later it's still so raw for you. A year of missed birthdays and holidays, school plays, soccer games, just that smile. A year of everyday joys gone forever. The bend of his smile, the perfect pitch of her laugh. At a vigil a few months later, one of the moms said, "When I lay in bed and turn to my side, envisioning her staring back at me, I want so badly to be part of alternative reality that just doesn't exist. This is my reality, because my 10-year-old daughter was murdered in her 4th grade classroom." Standing there in Uvalde, Jill and I couldn't help but think that too many schools, too many everyday places have become killing fields in communities all across every part of America. And in each place, we hear the same message. Do something. For God's sake, please do something. We did something afterwards, but not nearly enough. We still need to ban, in my view, AR-15 firearms and assault weapons once again. You know, they've been used time and again in mass killings of innocent children and people. We need to ban high-capacity magazines, the ability to shoot 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 bullets without reloading. Because today, guns remain the number one killer of children in America, guns. And over the last year since Uvalde, our country has experienced a staggering 650 mass shootings. And it's hard to say, well over 40,000 deaths due to gun violence. We can't end this epidemic until Congress pass some common sense gun safety laws and keep weapons of war off our streets and out of the hands of dangerous people. Until states do the same thing. How many more parents will live their worst nightmare before we stand up to the gun lobby to establish universal background checks, establish national red flag laws, require safe storage of firearms, and end immunity from liability for gun manufacturers? The only major corporate entity that doesn't have that's immune to liability. Even a majority of responsible gun owners support these common sense actions to save lives and keep our community safe. So it's time to act. It's time to act. It's time to make our voices heard, not as Democrats or as Republicans, but as friends, as neighbors, as parents, as fellow Americans. And I'm being deadly earnest when I say that. You know, I know for a long time it's been hard to make progress, but there will come a point where our voices are so loud, our determination so clear that we can no longer be stopped. We will act. You know, a year ago after visiting the school, that same day we attended Mass at Sacred Heart Catholic Church. In the pews, families and friends held each other tightly. As the Archbishop spoke, he asked the children in attendance to come up on the altar and sit with him as he spoke on the altar. There wasn't enough room for everybody to go up on the altar, so a mom and her young son sat next to us. They had us in the first pew. They sat next to us. As we left the church, a grandmother who had just lost her granddaughter came up to us and quietly passed us a note, a handwritten letter. And here's what it read. Erase the invisible line that is dividing our nation. Come up with a solution and fix what's broken and make the changes that are necessary to prevent this from ever happening again. My fellow Americans, you know, you almost feel the pain. For we've lost children. We have to do this to save our children. For the nation we love, to erase that invisible line. Jill and I stand here today, as earlier this morning we were talking about planning a memorial service this weekend, celebrating the anniversary of the death of our son, Bo. Well, guess what? While everyone's pain is different, we, like many of you, have some understanding what it's like to lose a child on more than one occasion. For those who have lost a loved one in Uvalde, to the moms, the dads, the brothers, the sisters, the grandmoms, the grandpops, this is what I know. One, they'll never be gone from your heart. They'll always be part of you. And I know this as well. As unbelievable as it sounds, I promise you, a day will come when you pass that ice cream store, you pass that park, you pass that thing that brings back the memory of your son or daughter. And it's going to bring a smile to your lips when you think of them before it brings a tear to your eye. That's when you know you're going to make it. And our prayer for you from the bottom of our heart is that day will come sooner than later. Sooner than later. But God willing, it will come. As I said, that's when you know you're going to make it. God bless those 21 blessed souls lost in this day in Uvalde. And may God bless their families. we're thinking of you.
Any update on the debt talks, Mr. President, please?
President Biden offering words of comfort to the families of those killed at Uvalde, Texas, at that school in Uvalde 1 year ago tonight. 21 people dead, 19 of them children. Let's bring back NBC News Chief White House Correspondent Peter Alexander. Peter, we heard a familiar laundry list from the president, a call for an assault weapons ban, a high-capacity magazine ban, a universal background. A list we have heard many times before. Has anything changed dramatically in this year?
You know, very little has changed, Lester. Obviously, were very sobering and powerful words by the president as we remember the 21 lives lost there in Uvalde exactly a year ago. But I was struck by the familiarity of his remarks. It was a year ago after Uvalde where the president said in his words, when in God's name are we going to get basically the backbone to stand up to the gun lobby? And in almost the same words, he said the same today, and how little has changed in the course of that time. There certainly was significant gun legislation, the most significant in 30 years, but it really speaks volumes more about the inability to come to some middle ground on this issue, and how much more division there remains on other issues like universal background checks, on the president's call for assault-style weapons to be banned, as well as the banning of those high-capacity magazines. The president obviously not finding any success on those efforts, most notably because of resistance among Republicans in Congress. This is obviously an issue that galvanized a lot of Americans on both sides, but one without a wider movement among lawmakers really will not see any further impact. Lester?
All right, Peter, thank you. Our senior national correspondent Tom Llamas was in Uvalde immediately after the shooting, recently spoke with parents there. We just, in fact, returned from Texas. Yeah. You talked to families and administrators about coping and healing and what that looks like a year later.
And it's incredibly difficult for them, as you can imagine, Lester. I spoke with one mother, Kimberly Mata Rubio. She lost her daughter, Lexi, just 10 years old. And I asked her, I said, what's it like 1 year later? And she said, it's even more difficult. She's reminded of her daughter everywhere. And she said this, she said, I hate this town. It's not because she hates anything about Uvalde, it's because she hates it because it reminds her of her daughter. But she can't leave. She feels trapped because that's where her daughter's buried. And right now there's actually a very sad struggle happening in Uvalde, because there are people who live there who don't ever want to forget, but they want the town to move on. And then there's all these people who are so connected to all these children and these two teachers who died, and they don't ever want to forget. They want to keep the memorials up. And it's a real struggle. And at the middle of a lot of this is the new superintendent who volunteered for the job, Gary Peterson. And I sat down with him and I talked to him and I said, how much of your job is administration now and how much is being a therapist? And he said, I can't answer you. And he said, sometimes I get up and it's tough. And he deals with families every single day. And when you go to Uvalde now, Lester, it's so strange. You see a cop car outside every school. There's a police officer inside. When you go through a school administrative building, it feels like Fort Knox. There are locks everywhere. And so I asked him, I said, this is the new normal. He said, yeah, this is the new normal. It's safer. And I said, but is it better? And he couldn't answer me. But that's the reality.
And then I know there's also this push for accountability still a year later after the way that shooting was handled. Yeah. Law enforcement officers on the sidelines essentially while the killing was taking place.
That is so tough for them, and there are ongoing investigations. The DOJ investigation is still ongoing a year later. And it's tough for them because it's constant reminders. Every now and then a certain video will be leaked, new information will come out, and it's information that makes it even harder to understand. Why did these law enforcement officers not move in on this gunman? On top of that, these mothers, they are on the front lines of trying to get change. I asked them, if you had the presidency or if you had one power, what's the one law you would change in this country? And they said what President Biden just said. They would ask for an assault weapons ban that would include AR-15s and similar weapons.
All right, Tom, we'll see you on Top Story on NBC News now a bit later on. Thank you. That concludes our NBC News special report. We'll have much more ahead on NBC Nightly News tonight and on our streaming channel, NBC News Now. I'm Lester Holt. Thank you for watching, everyone. We'll see you a bit later this afternoon.